Oriella, a 26-year-old nurse, had a simple, fulfilling life in the quiet suburbs of Seattle. Though her life wasn't extravagant, she found satisfaction in her work and was content living independently. But all of that changed when she met 50-year-old Brooke Parker, a wealthy businessman who was hospitalized for a minor health scare. Their connection was immediate. Oriella was drawn to Brooke's charm, his confident demeanor, and his worldly presence. He, in turn, was captivated by her warmth and gentle nature. What began as an innocent patient-caregiver relationship soon developed into flirtation, and before long, they were spending more time together outside of the hospital. Brooke's wealth and power piqued Oriella's interest, but it was his undivided attention and care that kept her intrigued. She couldn't shake the feeling that fate had somehow brought them together. After only 3 months of dating, Brooke surprised Oriella with an extravagant proposal. He rented out the rooftop of one of his high-rise hotels, with views of Seattle's skyline glittering in the background. Surrounded by candles and flowers, Brooke presented her with a massive 3-carat diamond ring, symbolizing both his love and his vision for their future. Oriella, swept up by the romance of the moment and his apparent devotion, said yes without hesitation. Despite the luxury, the proposal was more than just a gesture for Brooke. It was his way of asserting control over her. As he guided her through the planning of their wedding, it became clear that he was determined to create a perfect image of their life together, one where he was the clear leader. Oriella had always imagined her wedding to be a small, intimate affair with close friends and family, but with Brooke's immense wealth and desire to impress, the wedding became a grand spectacle. The venue was an exclusive Seattle ballroom, decorated to perfection with chandeliers, lavish floral arrangements, and gold accents. The guest list included business tycoons, celebrities, and influential figures from various industries. Oriella, in a designer wedding gown she barely had a say in, walked down an impossibly long aisle, feeling like a princess in a fairy tale, but at the same time, like she was an accessory to Brooke's grandeur. Though she felt overwhelmed, there was a part of her that couldn't deny how magical the moment seemed. Brooke showered her with attention, making grandiose promises of love and devotion. But as the day unfolded, Oriella couldn't shake the underlying sense that Brooke was orchestrating every aspect of their union for his own benefit. Still, overwhelmed by the lavishness and the eyes of everyone around them, Oriella tried to ignore these doubts. She was now married to a man who seemed perfect on the surface, yet with each passing day, she began to feel a subtle shift in the balance of power. The couple's honeymoon to the Maldives should have been a peaceful, romantic escape, but as they arrived at their 5-star private villa, Oriella quickly realized that the honeymoon was not going to be the romantic getaway she envisioned. Brooke's desire for control grew even stronger during their vacation. Every day was scheduled meticulously. From the time they woke up to the time they went to bed, Oriella was told what to wear, what to eat, and when to relax, all under the watchful eye of her new husband. Brooke displayed possessive behaviors, watching her every move. He became visibly irritated whenever Oriella interacted with the staff, even if it was just asking a simple question. His jealousy began to show as he became critical of her behavior, particularly if any other man gave her attention, no matter how innocent. The once beautiful Paradise Island began to feel more like a prison with each passing day, and Oriella realized that she was losing her independence. She began to question if this was the man she had married, and if this lavish honeymoon was an illusion designed to further entrap her. At first, Oriella tried to adjust to life with Brooke in his sprawling mansion. The mansion was a far cry from the small apartment she had once lived in, equipped with lavish decor, a pool, a private gym, and an endless array of luxuries. On the surface, it seemed like the perfect life. Yet beneath the opulence, Oriella soon realized that she was no longer in control of her life. Brooke, though loving on the surface, had an underlying need to control everything in her life. He demanded that she give up her nursing job and stay at home to focus solely on being his wife. Her social interactions were limited to those he approved of, and she began to feel a sense of disconnect from the outside world. The mansion, though beautiful, felt like a gilded cage, trapping her in a life she hadn't chosen. Her days, once filled with purpose and independence, now revolved around Brooke's schedule and needs. She couldn't make decisions on her own anymore. While she had everything she could possibly want materially, Oriella soon discovered that material wealth did not bring freedom or happiness. The life she had dreamed of was now a carefully constructed fantasy where every aspect of her existence was dictated by Brooke. She realized that she was not living her own life, but rather one that Brooke had designed for her. Brooke's desire to control Oriella became even more intense after they settled into the mansion. To ensure she was always within his reach, he installed cameras all over their property. At first he told her they were for security, but Oriella soon realized that the cameras were a way to monitor her every move. He would watch her on his devices, whether she was in the kitchen, the living room, or even in their bedroom. She was always being watched, and her every action, down to her conversations and gestures, was scrutinized. Her interactions with people outside of the home became increasingly rare. Brooke insisted that she cut off ties with friends and family, claiming that they were bad influences on her. Whenever Oriella tried to reach out to anyone, he would either interrupt her or accuse her of being disloyal. She couldn't make a simple phone call without him listening in, and even her texts were monitored. Oriella began to feel suffocated, as if she had no personal space left. Her every move was tracked, her every word monitored, and her privacy was non-existent. Brooke's surveillance felt like a prison sentence, and Oriella could no longer escape. Brooke took full control of Oriella's finances, as he did with every other aspect of her life. He told her that as her husband, it was his duty to manage their finances and that she should focus on being the perfect wife. Oriella was given a small allowance for personal expenses, but it was nowhere near enough to support her should she decide to leave. She had no access to their joint accounts, and any money she needed had to be requested from Brooke. Over time, she realized that she was completely financially dependent on him. She had no way of supporting herself outside of his wealth. The financial control was another layer of manipulation. Brooke ensured that Oriella could not make independent decisions. He dictated how they spent their money, from their extravagant vacations to their lavish lifestyle. Oriella had no say in their financial future. She became acutely aware of how trapped she was, not just emotionally, but now financially. The thought of leaving seemed impossible without the resources to do so, and this realization gnawed at her every day. Brooke had ensured that he held all the cards, and Oriella felt powerless. Oriella had hoped that the luxurious lifestyle Brooke promised her would bring fulfillment, but instead it became the foundation of her emotional unraveling. With every day that passed, she became increasingly isolated and lonely in the mansion, surrounded by expensive furnishings but emotionally adrift. Brooke's intense possessiveness took a toll on her mental state. His constant monitoring, not just of her whereabouts but even her thoughts, drained her sense of self-worth. He had slowly turned from the charming, attentive husband to an emotionally manipulative and domineering figure. Oriella began to experience waves of anxiety and depression, feeling suffocated by Brooke's surveillance and control. He insisted on being involved in every aspect of her life, from the smallest decisions about what to wear to who she could talk to. At first, she tried to brush it off, thinking it was a phase, but as time wore on, she began to question her identity. Was she still the independent, strong woman she once was, or had she become a mere extension of Brooke's will? She withdrew from the people who had once been her emotional lifeline. Calls from friends and family became less frequent as she became more isolated. When she did speak to them, Brooke was always there, listening, making her feel guilty for trying to reconnect. She could no longer trust herself, her decisions, or her feelings. Every conversation, even with herself, felt filtered through his gaze. The emotional toll was steep, her self-esteem withered, and she often felt like a shell of the person she used to be. Oriella's breaking point came after a particularly tense argument with Brooke. He had accused her of being ungrateful for all the wealth and opportunities he had given her. His words cut deeper than they ever had before. He belittled her desires, her need for independence, and her longing for her own voice. For the first time, Oriella saw the full extent of his manipulation. She realized that the life she had been living wasn't a partnership at all. It was an illusion, designed for his benefit. That night, she locked herself in the guest bedroom, her mind spinning with fear and sorrow. Tears blurred her vision as she thought about her marriage and the life she had sacrificed. Brooke was not the man she had married, but she felt helpless. She didn't have the emotional strength to fight him anymore, nor the financial means to leave. Her breaking point was not just physical exhaustion, but the realization that she had been gaslit for so long that she couldn't trust her own feelings. Her only escape seemed to be the idea of ending the pain. But instead of feeling relieved by the thought, Oriella felt horrified by how far she had fallen. This was not who she was, and yet the thought of fleeing her life felt impossible. She lay in the darkness, contemplating whether it was worth fighting for the small pieces of herself that remained, or giving in to the emotional exhaustion. Desperate for a way out of her toxic marriage, Oriella began to consider the most drastic option of all. She started planning Brooke's death. She had witnessed his erratic behavior and medical issues, including frequent prescriptions for painkillers and other medications. She began to research how to slowly poison him in a way that wouldn't immediately raise suspicion. At first, the idea seemed outlandish, but as the emotional and mental toll of her life with him intensified, the thought of ending her nightmare by any means became more appealing. Oriella's research was methodical. She learned about toxic substances that could be introduced subtly into his medication regimen. Brooke was already taking a range of prescribed medications for health issues that seemed plausible for him to be chronically ill. She could tamper with his pills, just a little at a time, increasing the dosage over weeks, making the effects gradual and harder to trace. Though she wrestled with guilt, Oriella began justifying the plan in her mind. She convinced herself that it was the only way she could regain her freedom. She no longer cared about the life she once dreamed of with Brooke, but rather she focused solely on escaping the suffocating life he had trapped her in. Every time she plotted the details of the poisoning, a part of her felt relieved that there could be an end to it all. As weeks passed, Oriella's plan took shape. Brooke's health continued to decline, and Oriella felt more confident that she could now deliver the final dose. She had been careful over the past several months, administering small amounts of poison mixed in with his pills, and the gradual worsening of his condition made it seem like a natural progression of his existing illnesses. On the night she decided to give him the final fatal dose, Oriella's hands trembled as she crushed the last of the poison into his medication. She told herself that this would be the last time, and once Brooke was gone, she would be free to rebuild her life. The sense of relief that washed over her after administering the dose was immense, but as the night wore on, the reality of what she had done began to set in. Brooke's condition deteriorated rapidly, and by the morning he was dead. Oriella, who had spent months planning and executing this moment, now stood in the wake of her actions. The reality of her freedom was bittersweet. She had killed him, but now she had the life she had longed for, or so she thought. After Brooke's death, Oriella took on the role of the grieving widow, but her emotions were a complex mix of guilt, relief, and confusion. In public, she wept openly at the funeral, surrounded by mourners who expressed their sympathy for her tragic loss. She wore black, her makeup deliberately smudged to convey the sorrow she was supposed to feel. Friends and family praised her for being a devoted wife, while Oriella privately battled with the horror of the action she had taken to get to this moment. She was now free of him, but the weight of having taken a life, her husband's life, was heavy on her shoulders. Her house, once a place of fear and restriction, now felt eerily empty. She could walk freely through its opulent halls without Brooke's prying eyes upon her, but this newfound freedom didn't bring her peace. Instead, it left her with a deep sense of unease and dread, as though the very air around her had been contaminated by the guilt of her actions. Oriella could not escape the constant reminder that she was indeed responsible for his death. Despite her inner turmoil, Oriella made sure to maintain appearances. She played the part of the widow well, adhering to societal expectations of grieving and mourning. But her grief was not genuine. It was an act, a performance for the public, her family, and friends. Every tear that fell from her eyes was carefully placed to elicit the sympathy she needed. It was a mask, one she had perfected after years of masking her true feelings. Behind closed doors, Oriella began to grapple with the consequences of what she had done. The relief she felt at being free from Brooke's control was gradually overshadowed by the realization that she had crossed a line that could never be undone. She was now a murderer, and no matter how much she tried to bury the truth, it would always be a part of her. As the news of Brooke's death spread, the fight over his estate began. Oriella, being his wife, was the natural beneficiary of his vast fortune, including the mansion, investments, and business holdings. However, Brooke had come from a family of powerful individuals, including distant relatives and business partners, who were now asserting claims to his wealth. Brooke's family was not entirely supportive of Oriella. They viewed her as a gold digger, a woman who had married into their family for financial gain, and they were determined not to let her inherit everything. The legal battle over his estate began almost immediately, with accusations of foul play and questions about whether Oriella had manipulated Brooke into signing over control of his assets shortly before his death. Oriella was no stranger to power struggles, but this was different. She had always thought she would inherit it all, but now she was fighting to maintain control over what she had gained from Brooke. The battle escalated as various family members and business associates made claims to pieces of the estate, questioning Oriella's integrity and accusing her of being involved in her husband's death for the sake of financial gain. At first, Oriella tried to remain calm, seeking legal counsel and preparing her case. But the deeper the battle went, the more she realized that the inheritance was not just a matter of wealth. It was about control over her life, over the legacy of a man she had killed, and over the world that had once seemed so promising. Every legal motion filed, every claim contested, chipped away at the carefully constructed persona she had spent years building. Detective Harry Rodriguez had been involved in high-profile cases before, but something about Brooke's death raised his suspicions. At first it appeared to be a natural death, a man in his mid-40s with a history of health problems and medications, succumbing to complications. However, there were inconsistencies in the timeline of events that made Rodriguez pause. The way Brooke's condition had declined so rapidly, combined with Oriella's sudden inheritance and her somewhat cold demeanor in the aftermath, planted the first seeds of doubt. Rodriguez was meticulous in his investigation. He began by reviewing Brooke's medical records, which revealed that he had been under treatment for various ailments. What stood out to the detective, however, was the lack of clarity regarding the cause of death. The autopsy had been inconclusive, and the signs of a natural decline didn't fully explain how someone so healthy just a few weeks prior could die so suddenly. Rodriguez then turned his attention to Oriella. She had claimed to be heartbroken, but something about her performance struck him as rehearsed. She seemed too composed, too willing to accept the condolences of others without any genuine outward signs of distress. The more he delved into her behavior, the more questions arose. Why was she so eager to take control of the estate so quickly? Was she really just a grieving widow, or was there something darker at play? The detective quietly began to interview people who were close to the couple, including friends, staff, and business associates, all the while scrutinizing Oriella's movements and alibis. Slowly, the pieces began to fit together, and the cracks in her perfect facade started to show. As Rodriguez continued to investigate, his suspicions of foul play grew stronger. He found that Oriella's behavior had shifted drastically over the last year of their marriage. Interviews with friends and associates revealed that Brooke had become more reclusive and unwell, but they couldn't pinpoint any concrete reason for his rapid deterioration. What was even more troubling was the fact that there were no clear answers about his medical history, no definitive diagnoses to explain his declining health. Rodriguez also learned that Oriella had been intimately involved in managing Brooke's medication, a fact that raised further questions. She had access to his prescriptions and seemed to have a hand in everything, from his daily routines to his health treatments. The detective began to suspect that Oriella may have been gradually poisoning Brooke, as he showed signs of being chronically ill without any clear medical cause. The idea that she had been orchestrating his death through subtle poisoning began to gain traction. The breakthrough came when the detective uncovered that one of Brooke's doctors had raised concerns about the rapid changes in his condition, but had been silenced by Oriella, who had insisted on taking full control of his medical care. Rodriguez dug deeper into Brooke's medical records and found that the prescription medication he had been taking had been refilled several times in the weeks leading up to his death, with increasing dosages that seemed inconsistent with his actual needs. It became clear to Rodriguez that Oriella was the one who had orchestrated Brooke's demise, and the case was no longer just about inheritance. It was about a well-planned murder. After weeks of painstaking investigation, Detective Rodriguez finally had enough evidence to make an arrest. Oriella was taken into custody on charges of first-degree murder. She was shocked, her facade of grief and vulnerability slipping away in an instant as she was handcuffed and led away. Her lawyer tried to intervene, but the case against her was solid. The evidence, medical reports, witness statements, and the discovery of toxic substances in Brooke's system was irrefutable. The arrest was a media sensation, as the world watched a woman who had once seemed like the perfect widow now being accused of murdering her wealthy husband. The press covered every aspect of her life, delving into her past, her marriage to Brooke, and her increasingly suspicious behavior in the weeks before his death. The image of the grieving widow was now replaced with that of a cold-blooded murderer, and Oriella's world came crashing down. The trial of Oriella was a spectacle that captivated the nation. The courtroom was filled with tension as the prosecution laid out its case. They painted Oriella as a manipulative woman who had murdered her husband for money, carefully planning his death over the course of several months. Expert witnesses testified about the medical evidence, pointing to the signs of poisoning in Brooke's system and the toxic substances that had been gradually administered. Oriella's defense team, on the other hand, tried to argue that her actions had been the result of years of emotional abuse at the hands of her husband. They portrayed her as a victim who had been manipulated and controlled by Brooke, and they claimed that she had acted out of self-defense after enduring years of psychological torment. But the jury found this argument less compelling as the evidence mounted. The courtroom drama unfolded with twists and turns, with emotional testimony from both sides. Friends and family members were called to the stand, each giving their perspective on Brooke's relationship with Oriella. Oriella, sitting in the defendant's chair, remained mostly stoic, but her once confident demeanor now seemed shaky under the weight of the charges against her. After a week of testimony, the jury finally deliberated. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as they weighed the evidence. Ultimately, they returned with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Oriella was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge pronounced the sentence, Oriella's face remained emotionless, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of something, perhaps regret, perhaps disbelief. She had thought she could escape her past, but now it had caught up with her. The public cheered the conviction, seeing it as justice for the man whose life she had taken. The conviction sparked a fierce public debate. Many felt that Oriella had been rightfully convicted of murder, while others believed that her actions had been the result of years of psychological abuse at the hands of her controlling husband. Some viewed her as a victim who had been pushed to her breaking point, while others saw her as a cold-blooded killer who had manipulated the system to her advantage. The media sensationalized every detail of her trial, focusing on the drama and intrigue of her personal life. Oriella became a symbol of both victimhood and villainy, her story told and retold in headlines and television specials. The public's opinion was divided, but one thing was clear: Oriella's life as she had known it was over. In the quiet of her prison cell, Oriella had time to reflect on everything she had lost. The life of luxury, the power, the control, all of it was gone. She was no longer a wealthy widow living in a mansion. She was a convicted murderer, serving a life sentence in a cold, harsh environment. Oriella spent her days in solitude, contemplating her actions. She had once believed that killing Brooke would free her from his control, but now she realized that she had traded one kind of prison for another. The freedom she had longed for had been an illusion, and now she was trapped, not just by the walls of her cell, but by the guilt and regret that consumed her every waking moment. As she reflected on her life, Oriella came to understand the true cost of her choices. She had sacrificed her integrity, her future, and her sense of self in pursuit of something that was ultimately hollow. The woman who had once dreamed of a better life was now facing the harsh reality of her actions, knowing that no matter how much she had gained, she had lost everything that truly mattered.